She was a queen like no other, a woman who defied the laws of God and man to seize power for herself. Athaliah, daughter of the infamous Jezebel, was raised in a world where murder and manipulation were the keys to the throne. When her husband, the king, fell and her son was slain, she saw not tragedy, but opportunity. With a heart colder than steel, she orchestrated one of the most ruthless massacres in biblical history, wiping out her own family to rule alone. But her reign of terror would not last forever. A secret hidden in the temple would be her undoing. Who was this woman who nearly erased the house of David? And how did her empire of blood finally crumble? This is the untold story of Athaliah, the queen who tried to outmaneuver destiny only to be crushed by it. Athaliah was born into a world where power was seized through deception, manipulation, and bloodshed. As the daughter of King Ahab and Queen Jezebel of Israel, she was raised in an environment steeped in idolatry and ruthless ambition. Her mother, Jezebel, was notorious for leading Israel into Baal worship and silencing the prophets of Yahweh through murder and intimidation. Athaliah learned these lessons well, growing into a woman who saw mercy as weakness and power as the only thing worth pursuing. Unlike other women of her time, she did not seek influence through her husband. She wanted the throne itself. But before she could claim it, she had to play the long game, securing her place through a strategic marriage. She was given to Jehoram, the prince of Judah, forging an alliance between the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. This union was not one of love or faithfulness. It was political, a calculated move to expand her family's influence over both kingdoms. When Jehoram became king, Athaliah's influence darkened the land of Judah. Under her persuasion, Jehoram walked in the wicked ways of Ahab's house, forsaking Yahweh and leading his people into idol worship. He even went so far as to kill his own brothers, anyone who could challenge his rule, an act reminiscent of the bloodthirsty nature of Ahab's dynasty. But divine justice would not be ignored. Jehoram's reign was plagued with disasters, and in the end, he suffered a slow and agonizing death, stricken by a disease so severe that his insides rotted away. The people did not mourn him. Instead, they buried him without honor, a testament to how despised he had become. But Athaliah did not grieve the loss of her husband. In her eyes, this was simply another step forward in her quest for control. Her son Ahaziah ascended the throne after Jehoram's death, but his reign was short-lived. Following in his father's footsteps, Ahaziah was deeply influenced by his mother and continued in the ways of Baal. However, his rule came to a sudden end when he was caught in the sweeping purge led by Jehu, the man anointed by God to bring judgment upon Ahab's house. Ahaziah was hunted down and killed, his life cut short as part of the divine reckoning against his family. News of his death reached Jerusalem, and at that moment Athaliah had a choice: to accept defeat or to seize the throne by any means necessary. And in true fashion of Ahab's lineage, she did what no woman before her had dared to do. She took the crown for herself. But the path to power would be drenched in the blood of her own kin. Athaliah was not just a princess. She was a product of the most wicked dynasty in Israel's history. Born into the house of Ahab and Jezebel, she was raised in a world where power was seized through manipulation, betrayal, and bloodshed. Her father, King Ahab, was infamous for leading Israel into idolatry, defying the prophets of God, and marrying the cunning and ruthless Jezebel, a woman who embodied the darkest aspects of ambition. From an early age, Athaliah witnessed her mother's relentless pursuit of control, a woman who bent kings and nations to her will. She watched as Jezebel silenced her enemies, murdering Yahweh's prophets, corrupting the priests, and replacing the worship of the true God with the abominable rites of Baal. But Athaliah did not simply admire her mother's power, she absorbed it. She learned that fear was a greater weapon than love, that alliances were temporary, and that the only way to ensure one's survival was to eliminate all threats before they could rise. Unlike other royal daughters who were raised to secure peace through marriage, Athaliah was raised to rule. She had no intention of being a submissive queen consort. She would carve her own destiny, even if it meant walking over the bodies of her own family. As part of her mother's political strategy, Athaliah was given in marriage to Jehoram, the son of King Jehoshaphat of Judah. This union was meant to strengthen the ties between Israel and Judah, forming a powerful alliance against their enemies. But what seemed like a political move was, in reality, an infiltration. With Athaliah in the palace of Judah, the corruption of Ahab's house spread southward. Jehoshaphat had been a righteous king, devoted to Yahweh, but his decision to align with Ahab's family proved to be disastrous for Judah. The moment Jehoram ascended to the throne, everything changed. Under Athaliah's influence, Jehoram turned away from the ways of his father and embraced the wickedness of Ahab's house. He slaughtered all his brothers, every single one who could have challenged his claim to the throne. This was no coincidence. This was the mark of Athaliah's upbringing. It was the same ruthlessness Jezebel had taught her, to remove every possible threat before it could rise. But Jehoram's reign was not blessed. It was cursed. His kingdom suffered repeated attacks from enemies. His people rebelled, and most tellingly, the prophet Elijah sent him a chilling prophecy, a divine warning that his evil would not go unpunished. And indeed, judgment came. Jehoram was struck with a horrifying disease, one so painful and gruesome that his insides rotted away. For 2 years he suffered, wasting away in agony. And when he finally died, not a single person mourned him. There was no royal procession, no grand funeral. The people buried him without honor, a fitting end for a king who had forsaken God. But Athaliah was not a grieving widow. She was a woman who saw every tragedy as an opportunity. With Jehoram dead, her son, Ahaziah, was crowned king. This was her chance to secure her grip on Judah. Ahaziah was young, inexperienced, and most importantly, completely under her control. She had molded him into a king who followed her will, a mere extension of her own ambition. Under his reign, Judah continued down the path of idolatry, entrenching Baal worship deeper into the land. But Ahaziah's rule was short-lived, very short-lived. In the northern kingdom, a man named Jehu had been anointed by God to bring judgment upon the house of Ahab. Jehu was no ordinary man. He was a warrior, a force of reckoning, determined to wipe out every trace of Ahab's corruption from Israel. And so, the purge began. Ahab's sons were slaughtered. Jezebel herself was thrown from a window, her blood splattering against the walls of the palace as dogs devoured her body. And then Jehu turned his attention south, to Ahaziah, the son of Athaliah. Ahaziah fled, but he could not escape divine judgment. He was hunted down and killed like an animal, his blood spilling as another piece of Ahab's legacy was erased from history. When news of Ahaziah's death reached Jerusalem, chaos erupted in the palace. Athaliah's son, her ticket to power, was gone. A normal queen mother might have gone into mourning, weeping for the loss of her child. But Athaliah was no ordinary queen mother. She had lost her son, but she had not lost her ambition. If anything, this was an opportunity. Without hesitation, she did what no woman before her had ever dared to do. She seized the throne for herself. But she knew that simply claiming the throne was not enough. There were others, potential heirs from the line of David, those who could rightfully challenge her rule. And Athaliah knew exactly what needed to be done. Just as her husband had murdered his brothers, just as her mother had silenced her enemies, Athaliah would secure her rule through bloodshed. She ordered the slaughter of every royal descendant, every son, every grandson, every potential rival from the house of David. The screams of innocent children filled the palace halls as the future of Judah was wiped out in a single, merciless night. With no one left to oppose her, Athaliah declared herself queen. She had done what no other woman in the history of Judah had done. She had seized the throne by force. But what Athaliah did not know was that she had overlooked something small, something hidden. In the depths of the temple, beneath the watchful eyes of Yahweh's priests, a single child had been spared, a child who carried the bloodline of David, a child who, one day, would rise to reclaim the throne. Athaliah had done the unthinkable. No queen before her had ever ruled Judah alone. No woman had ever dared to sit upon the throne as the sole monarch. But Athaliah was not bound by tradition or law. She was bound only by her thirst for control. The moment her son, King Ahaziah, was slain, she knew that her time had come. But there was one problem. Judah was still a kingdom of kings, not queens. She could not simply take the throne. She had to eliminate every potential rival, every rightful heir before they could rise against her. And so, she unleashed terror upon her own bloodline. In a night of horror that would stain Judah's history forever, Athaliah ordered the massacre of all royal descendants, her own grandchildren, nephews, and distant relatives. The palace that once echoed with the laughter of young princes became a slaughterhouse. Children were ripped from their beds, their cries for mercy swallowed by the clash of swords. Blood seeped between the cracks of the temple's stone floors as the dynasty of David, God's chosen lineage, was nearly wiped out. To Athaliah, this was not murder. This was security. This was power. With every child slain, her grip on the throne tightened. For 6 years, Athaliah ruled without challenge. She had slaughtered every possible heir, or so she thought. She had crushed opposition, ruled through fear, and silenced those who dared to speak against her. But despite her ruthless reign, something was shifting in the hearts of the people. Yahweh had not abandoned Judah, and neither had his priests. The high priest Jehoiada had waited long enough. The secret he had protected, the child Joash, the last surviving heir of the house of David, was no longer just an infant. He was a boy now, old enough to be revealed, old enough to claim his rightful place as king. The time had come to bring down the usurper. Jehoiada knew that Athaliah would not give up her throne without a fight. He needed a plan, one that would ensure the boy's safety while also securing the people's support. And so, he summoned the royal bodyguards, the Levites, and the military captains, men who still remained loyal to Yahweh and to the rightful line of David. In secret, he revealed Joash to them. The moment they saw the boy, the living proof that Athaliah's massacre had failed, their loyalty was sealed. Jehoiada gave them strict orders. 1/3 of the guards would be stationed at the palace gates, ensuring that no spies or messengers could alert Athaliah. Another third would stand at the temple entrance, protecting Joash and those inside. The last third would surround Joash himself, shielding him from any attempt on his life. With swords in hand and conviction in their hearts, the plan was set. The rebellion was about to begin. "Behold the king!" The declaration rang through the temple like a thunderclap. The people gasped, eyes widening as they looked upon the boy standing before them. For 6 years they had believed the line of David was dead. For 6 years they had suffered under Athaliah's rule. But now, here stood the true heir, the last hope of Judah. The crowd erupted, shouts of joy, praise to Yahweh, and chants of, "Long live the king," filled the air as Jehoiada anointed Joash, placing the crown upon his head. The trumpets sounded. The people cheered. The rebellion had begun. But then, Athaliah heard it. Her eyes narrowed. Something was wrong. She rose from her throne, draping herself in her royal garments. The sound was growing louder, rolling through the streets like an oncoming storm. Soldiers scrambled around her, uncertain, afraid to speak. Finally, a terrified servant burst into the throne room, panting, his face pale. "My queen, the people, they are declaring a new king." She bursts into the temple courtyard, and there before her eyes stands the boy. Joash, the son she thought she had erased, the child she had failed to kill, and he is wearing the crown. She shrieks, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Treason! Treason!" But no one stands with her. The guards do not move. The priests do not listen. The people of Judah do not rise to defend her. They see her for what she is, a usurper, a murderer, a queen who stole the throne through bloodshed. And then Jehoiada speaks. "Take her outside. The command is final. The temple is sacred. No blood must be spilled within its walls." The guards step forward, seizing Athaliah by the arms. She thrashes, screams, fights, but it is useless. The same soldiers who once obeyed her now drag her from the temple. Her reign is over. She is executed. Her reign of terror ends where it began, in blood. And so the house of David was restored. Athaliah had tried to erase God's promise. She had tried to destroy his chosen line, to rewrite destiny with blood and treachery. But in the end, she was the one erased. Because no one can outmaneuver God's plan. On fire, Joash begins his reign. Though just a child, Joash had one great advantage. He was surrounded by godly counsel. Under Jehoiada's mentorship, he ruled wisely, ensuring that the ways of Yahweh were upheld. The people who had once suffered under a corrupt ruler now flourished under the rule of a king who followed God. For as long as Jehoiada lived, Judah prospered. But as all things do, time passed. The high priest who had saved the kingdom, the man who had raised Joash like a father, grew old. And one day he passed away at the age of 130 years. Joash begins to drift. Without Jehoiada's wisdom to guide him, the young king became vulnerable. New advisors, men with their own agendas, began to influence him. These were leaders who had secretly admired Athaliah's ways, men who still held on to idolatry in their hearts. And slowly, they led Joash away from the path of Yahweh. At first it was subtle, small compromises, minor allowances. But then it became more. Idolatry crept back into Judah. Baal worship, once violently purged from the land, began to seep in once more. The people so quick to celebrate their restoration were just as quick to fall into their old ways. And when Jehoiada's son, Zechariah the new high priest, stood before the king and warned him, calling him back to Yahweh, Joash did the unthinkable. He ordered Zechariah's execution. With Athaliah dead, the people of Judah stood in a strange silence. The streets, once filled with fear, now buzzed with murmurs of relief, hope, and uncertainty. For 6 years they had known nothing but the reign of a queen who ruled with terror. Now their true king, Joash, had been restored, but he was still only a child, just 7 years old. How could a boy lead a kingdom? Jehoiada knew that a child could not rule alone, and so he took charge, not as a king, but as a guardian. He would guide the young king, ensure that Judah did not fall back into darkness. And his first order of business? Erasing the influence of Baal from Judah forever. The people stormed the temple of Baal. This was the place where Athaliah had led them to worship a false god, where idols had replaced the true altar of Yahweh. Now it would be torn down. The priests of Baal, the ones who had thrived under Athaliah's rule, trembled in fear as the people flooded in. Their false god could not protect them now. The golden idols were smashed, the altars were ripped apart, and Matan, the high priest of Baal, was dragged out and executed on the spot. The message was clear. Baal had no place in Judah anymore. The covenant was renewed. With Athaliah's corruption wiped away, Jehoiada led the people in restoring their promise to Yahweh. He gathered the elders, the priests, and the leaders of Judah, and together they stood before God, swearing to follow his law once more. The temple of Yahweh, neglected for years, was reopened. The burnt offerings resumed. The Levitical priests, the rightful servants of God, took their places once more. For the first time in years, the kingdom was back under God's protection.